Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? I am trying to get ready. There's only one person in the chat. This might be a short one if there's not a lot of people. Yeah, it looks like it's working. Okie dokie, artichokey. Got my list. I got my horses in the back. That's not true. I don't have any horses at all. So, anyway, today we're talking about period 4. Don't know if there's any questions about it. Period 4. That's Emma from period 1. Say hello. Everybody else say hi. It might just be you. I don't know. So, say yo. If you're not Emma already said yo. Anyway, any questions? Any questions that you might have? The period 4, I like period 4 quite a bit because it's the 2 world wars. It's the rise of totalitarians kind of in there. What else you got? The Cold War, obviously. And if you know that stuff, then you should be good. And some of that's pretty recent. So I think that tends to favor students. Now, the problem is that they tend to ask questions that you might get confused on, for instance, or they might ask an essay question. I've always thought a good essay question would be something like compare and contrast the ways that dictator controlled his people with absolutist controlled his people. So like compare how did Peter the Great control his people as opposed to Stalin. I think that would make a fairly good, compare and contrast, or something like continuity and change, like how is it similar or some such. I do think that World War I, obviously, is very testable. World War II, in a weird way, less so. What do you want to talk about with the Cold Wars? I don't know why there's plural there. But yeah, Cold Wars. What do you want to talk about? Ask questions. Did you mean World Wars, you goose? Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to pause for a second for you to ask any questions you might have, and then I'll just launch into a spiel. Again, 3:30 now. I don't see it as needing to go super long if there's only like 2 people in the chat. I'm pausing. When did the Cold War start? Cold War starts in 1945. Well, okay. The Americans did not like the Russians. Let's start there. We were very uncomfortable with everything in relation to communism. Capitalism is in many ways incompatible with communism because communism ultimately calls for the overthrow of capitalism. So I think that you could say it starts a little sooner. The Americans had supported the anti-Soviet whites during the Russian Civil War of the late 1910s, early 1920s, and the Russians didn't forget this because we supported the anti-communist forces. We had tried to keep the provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky in the war. So with that as kind of a background, I stand by my answer that 1945 was the beginning of the Cold War. but there was history there. There was already a lot of resentment. So basically, in 1945, we had a dispute in February at the Yalta Conference, and therein we had Stalin, we had FDR, Roosevelt from America, and we had Churchill from Great Britain, and we were all like, yo, what are we going to do with Germany after we win? Because it was obvious we were going to win, but it wasn't obvious, like, you know, how we would handle it when we were all done. So there was a general feeling that we had to have this conference. This was not uncommon for allies to have a conference during a war to kind of figure out, like, you know, what's our plan here? One of the things that we asked was like, hey, Russia, Soviet Union, can you guys help us out after the after everything's over? You know, can we, after everything's over with Germany, will you declare war on Japan? And Soviet Union's like, sure, buddy, of course we will. It's like, okay, cool. Then we also pressed for, like, okay, so what's Germany going to look like? We think we should divide it up and, you know, use that to kind of denazify them. That's actually a real thing. We call it denazification, which is to remove dangerous elements from the political scene so that we can make sure that that doesn't repeat itself. And the Soviets are like, cool. And we're like, oh, okay. So we divide Germany up into 4. Well, that's the plan, at least. And of course, we will do it when Germany is ultimately defeated in May in the same year, 1945. And then we set up British, American, Soviet, and French. Remember, the French were technically on our side, even though they got dunked on right there at the beginning of the war in 1940. So there's that. Oh, questions. Cyan says, what is it about? Basically 1914 to present. And Eva says, did this era single-handedly shape our modern world? That's a really good point. I think you could definitely make that argument. Because one of the things, moving back to Yalta, is that we wanted to guarantee that the people in Eastern Europe would be left alone, basically, that they'd be able to choose their own fate. Remember, Czechoslovakia, for example, was a democracy prior to the Second World War. And we wanted to be like, hey, you know, if they want to still be a democracy, that's cool. And so, yeah. So we're like, do that. And Stalin agrees. But he's a big old liar face. He's not a good man. He ends up reversing this later on that year after Roosevelt has passed on and it's time for Truman to be president. And he says, yo, guys, I'm not going to guarantee free elections in Eastern Europe. And I'm actually going to kind of do the opposite. And that creates a lot of tension. So once the Germans are defeated and then once the Japanese are defeated, we're able to kind of look at them and go like, okay, listen, you need to chill. The Soviets are like, what do you mean? We need to chill. I don't understand this chill. And we're all like, dude, not cool. We want you to be full on, like, you know, hey, we want to guarantee freedoms for people. But the Soviet position was that they were like a besieged fortress, and they saw themselves as constantly under attack from the West. They look back to Napoleon and say Napoleon was attacking, and then Hitler was attacking. We need to have kind of a space cushion here, something in between. What's more, we also need to worry about also we need to worry about you know, the fact that we're the only communist country in Europe. If we could expand that, it would make communism more successful. Because remember, Karl Marx had called for a worldwide communist thingamabobber revolution. So, sorry, my son just texted me and said he wanted honey bunches of oats, and it blocked my screen for a second. So I was a little confused about that. So anyway, the long and the short of it is that's what causes the issues with the Soviet Union. Everything from 1945 to 1991, all of our foreign policy in the United States, it's all predicated on basically the Truman Doctrine, where we want to contain the Soviets, and our perceived incompatibility with the communists, which is to say, we want to, we're fine with letting them live, but we do not want them to have the power to destroy us. We're worried that they will never be satisfied with an equal relationship. Remove what? Oh. No doll. Anyway, so that's the causes of the Cold War. Give him the oats. Well, I don't know what that means. Anyway, so that's that. Now, other questions. Why did the Cold War start? Did this era single-handedly shape our modern world? Yeah, because a lot of our current geopolitical situation is all because of the Cold War. It's not that long ago. Your parents grew up in it. I grew up in it. We remember thinking that the Soviets were like the evil enemy. It's very hard for some of us to think of the Russians as being an ally with us here in America, since they seem to have their own thing. It's really locked in my head. Like, I don't know if you can trust those Russian politicians. You know what they got in mind. When in reality, I'm sure it's not that bad, but it is what it is. Oh, you, my son, the honey bunches of oats. I will get my son the honey bunches of oats. I'm going to go to Target on the way home, I think. Boop, boop, boop. Do we need to remember anything on trench warfare? I think yes. Trench warfare, the conditions of soldiers would probably be a more fair kind of question. How did World War I change militarily the situation in Europe? Those might be good questions. And to kind of go like, okay, well, they make trenches because they're too evenly matched. You can't have breakthroughs anymore. In the old style from the 19th century is gone, and you still have people trying to do cavalry charges and stuff. World War I is an interesting war because it has elements of the old and elements of the new. So there's that. As far as what you need to know about trench warfare, I mean, knowing trench warfare is pretty good. Knowing where it was, the Western Front, knowing it stretches all the way from the North Sea all the way down to the Alps. You should know that. And yeah. I don't have the cat here, Kate. I'm doing this from school. I'm sorry. I wish. And if you have your cat available, please make sure to cuddle it. So there's that. Any other general questions? When does reforms start to die down? When did Stalin's reforms start to die down? Stalin's reforms, depends on what you mean. Okay, Stalin's reforms in Russia were obviously make it even more communist than Lenin. Lenin didn't rule for that long. So he dies in 1953, he being Stalin. Before that, he had set into place a police state for all intents and purposes. He had set up multiple five-year plans where he wanted to industrialize the Soviet Union. So those reforms were still in effect. I mean, those didn't go away. Stalin's remaking of the Soviet Union into a military powerhouse that not only had a ton of people, but also the ability to destroy the world with nuclear weapons, that was all in effect. That's nothing that goes away. The way that the subsequent leaders like Khrushchev changed things is they say, all right, Stalin was super evil, and maybe we need to tone down our love for him a little bit, take down the statues of him, remove his name from cities, like there's a city called Stalingrad that becomes Volgograd, stuff like that. Other than that, though, I mean, he's still a pretty bad astronaut as far as like the way he treats others. In 1956, the Hungarians attempt to kind of soften things up a little bit, test themselves. Khrushchev sends troops in to destroy them. He sets up the Berlin Wall in 1961, forbidding people from fleeing from the east to the west. So, you could say, like, yeah, Khrushchev's so much better. It's like, well, yeah, compared to Stalin, perhaps, but compared to your average leader, he is still probably considered worse as far as keeping his people in a position where they had very little freedom of speech. Although it was a lot better than Stalin. But do you really want to compare yourself to Stalin and that's your best thing? It's like, girl, I'm a bad boyfriend, but I'm a better boyfriend than Hitler. That's not the kind of analogy you want to make. That doesn't make you appealing. Sad question. How many people died in versus Stalin and Hitler? Stalin kills, okay, it depends on how you calculate. Hitler, from the Holocaust alone, is 12 million. But a lot of people died in Germany. And sometimes when you calculate those numbers, you go like, well, how many people died between, the death camps of Hitler, 1941 to 1945 approximately, or how many died in labor camps that were set up beforehand, like concentration camps beforehand, where people were worked to death or died of disease and stuff. Hitler, you could get all the way up to about 20 million. Stalin, the same thing. You got to look at how it's calculated, but I would say 40 million is a very safe number. If you want to be like super, like, well, we can't blame him for everything, maybe 30 million, but 40 million is pretty darn fair, I think. The Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine, I don't know if that was a question or if it's like Shelwyn style, where you just say words and then have random punctuation at the end and say, that's my question. But the Truman Doctrine is the American idea that we should contain communism. So anywhere that communism tries to spread into, we stop them, basically. So like North Korea invading South Korea, we stop them. North Vietnam invading South Vietnam, we stop them. Greece, the communists want to assert themselves more in Greece. No, we stop them. So that. What I would really focus on with the Cold War is I would know, like, okay, what was life like in the East versus the West? Okay, in the East, it's, like I said, a police state, severe repression of personal freedoms, things like that, versus the West, they're democratic, they're capitalist, they're free. Now, are there positive things about the East? Yes. Women experienced more equality for the most part. I might think that. 85% of the doctors in the Soviet Union were female. So that's definitely a heck of a lot better than it was in America at the time. Women served in combat under Stalin during World War II, the so-called night witches, who were a very highly decorated fighting force, Air Force of women unit. So you could look at questions like that. I also think you should be familiar with Gorbachev's reforms, his glasnost, his openness, as far as trying to make things better for the people by having people discuss problems and like having a dialogue about it rather than just censorship and whatnot. Perestroika, where he opens up the ability for people to look for solutions economically in non-communist ways, allowing Western companies to make investments in Russia. Of course, we saw in class McDonald's and Pizza Hut, but there are others as well that are getting involved. But you should definitely know like those terms. Yeltsin is a good guy to know. Yeltsin is the one who is the president of Russia. He's the first president of the independent Russia when it's no longer a part of the Soviet Union anymore. And he boldly steps up against a coup, an attempted takeover by old school hardline communists who were trying to get rid of Gorbachev. And he's like, nah, we ain't doing that. And literally stands on a tank and is like, what you gonna do? You gonna shoot me? Do it. Everybody's watching. I got cameras on me. Do it. And everybody's like, no, Yeltsin, you cool. We won't do it. But he also has his flaws in that he introduces that kind of shock therapy thing where it's like, hey, everybody, guess what? We're capitalists now. It's like, oh, whoops, that takes the economy. It's okay. It'll work out eventually. And a lot of people were like, I don't like this. Communism was a lot safer and a lot more guaranteed, and we knew it. And it's not until Putin comes along where he kind of fixes some of the corruption in the society, cracks down on organized crime, things like that, depending on how you look at it. You could be very critical of Putin as well. I'm not defending Putin as a good person. I'm saying that he, like all strongmen, is very good at shutting down opposition. And sometimes the opposition is, people who are journalists and stuff, which obviously is very bad. But sometimes they're crime figures, that would create a sense of lawlessness, and obviously that would be considered better. So Yeltsin, yeah, he's a capitalist, basically. He's trying to introduce capitalism to Russia. There's probably more nuanced takes on that, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. Behind the times, Mr. Oliver. Oh, yeah, that's true. I am. I'm assuming the essay questions you talked about in class today, we need to pay attention to the social impact, such as the need for workers. A good thing to study would be always, how did the lives of women change during the Cold War? And you'd always want to look, birth control allows for family planning. Women joined the workforce in all kinds of different things. Powerful female leaders like Margaret Thatcher. These are all things that you should be familiar with. Those shouldn't be brand new terms to you, and they should be ones that you can kind of work with. The need for workers, yeah, I don't know exactly what you mean, but the need for workers could be like the workers, like the intelligentsia heading from East Berlin to West Berlin as part of what they call brain drain. So that could be a thing. It could be the workers in the East being treated poorly, being paid less, stuff like that. I mean, I guess that's what you're talking about. Clarify if I didn't answer it. Is the space race important for the test? Yeah, I think the space race is important. It's largely symbolic for us, but I wouldn't be shocked if there was a multiple choice question or 3 on that one, because you can get at a lot of things. So think about those stimulus questions and say they had a picture of, like, I don't know, Sputnik, maybe some space propaganda, like pro-Soviet or pro-American space propaganda. And then they said, like, all of the following were consequences of the space race, except. And then you could talk about, like, it led to increased science and math in the United States, or the Soviet Union was successful in putting a man up in space first, a woman up in space first, a dog up in space first, R.I.P. Laika, and stuff like that. Other than that, like, do you need to know Yuri Gagarin's name as being the first man in space? Probably not, but is it nice? Yes. Details? Okay, look, it's like this. Ice cream's always good. If you could put a scoop of ice cream into a bowl and that ice cream represents knowledge, good. I know the Russians put a man in space. Good. But isn't ice cream a little better when you add a little bit of syrup, maybe some sprinkles? That's your minor details, like your Yuri Gagarin, calling him a cosmonaut instead of saying he's an astronaut, being able to identify that the Soviets put the first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, things like that. It makes you look like you have a preponderance or a lot of evidence, that's overwhelming amount of evidence, that you really know what you're talking about, as opposed to just being like, well, I hope this works out, that sort of thing. Social impact, the impact from World War I. Oh yeah. You mean like women going into the workforce, and then when the men return, having their jobs taken away. And then later on, women joining the workforce in greater numbers, taking other jobs. By the way, the same thing happens in World War II. Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely should know stuff like that. Yeltsin was capitalist. Yep. Putin is still president. Yes, there was a certain number of terms he could be president for, and then he took a break, and he was like the special advisor to the president for at least 1 or 2 terms. I don't remember that guy's name. I want to say it was Dmitry Mendeleev or something like that. And then Putin, after that, he was like, okay, well, I'm going to run again. And he successfully won. There was assertions that he had cheated in the balloting. In one district, for example, 110% of the population voted for him. even though that's more people than lived there. Are there any literature works that you should know? Yes. Let me screen share so that I can spell it, because I'm spelling. I don't want to try to just pronounce it because I think that might be difficult. Okay, so Boris Pasternak is the author of a book called Dr. Zhivago, and that is a book that talks about the effects of the Russian Revolution. It's a love story as well. You can tell, see, the people are all kissy and all that. See, look, those people are kissing. Stay away from that until you go to college or get married, even better. But it's very good stuff. You should also know, same of it, the Gulag Archipelago. Thank you for spelling that, Google. And the Gulag Archipelago describes what it was like in the, thank you, Google. That's the author there. Alexander Solzhenitsyn is the pronunciation I usually use. He talks about what life was like in the prison camps there, the gulags, stuff like that. What other one? Zhivago is a fiction. Gulag Archipelago. Those are like the big two that you should talk about. I don't know why Jordan Peterson is coming up there. I don't know if he's written a book too about that. Cyan just asked a question I didn't know the answer to because I don't know who the heck that is. So you have my permission to not know about the composer known as Shostakovich. I wouldn't fret about that boy too much. Dr. Zhivago, I've never read it. But as I understand, it's about life and love during the Russian Revolution, and I think it doesn't paint everyone as being as perfectly noble as maybe the official communist propaganda might imply. That's my take on it from what I understand. Literature works, boop, Yeltsin, boop, Shostakovich, yep. All right. Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Other questions? Do you have them today? Why does it say one person is there? I could see a lot more than one person here. Unless everybody just left over the last 5 minutes because they got bored about that question, or I didn't know who Shostakovich or whatever his name is. People were just like, oh, no way. If Oliver doesn't know who Shostakovich is, I'll look him up just because, for reasons, just to see if. Well, that's a Russian response. He had a bunch of symphonies and stuff. I mean, I'm sure he's wonderful. YouTube's glitching. It says 8. Georgie's here. Super. Okay, well, I don't know anything about Dmitry Shostakovich. I wouldn't fret about that guy. Who should you worry about in the 20th century? Stream of consciousness literature. I messed up the word consciousness just now. Virginia Woolf, James Joyce. James Joyce is going to be one that comes up a lot, but Virginia Woolf is a lady, and the social historians that make the test will be interested in her because of that. Basically, writing like as it happens. Like, you know, I walked into the room. There was a desk there. I sat down at the desk. I looked around. I felt cold. Everything felt cold. The whole world felt cold. I took a drink. The drink was cold. I was cold inside. You know, that sort of thing. That's stream of consciousness. Also, James Joyce writes a book called Ulysses. I think we talked about that one a little bit. Ulysses is essentially, yo, I'm crazy. I'm writing this book that has so many levels to it that you have to have like a companion guide with footnotes in order to make sense of this. There are still authors who do this sort of thing, that write books that aren't immediately You can't just, it's not just a direct, here is the plot, here is the characters. Instead, there's like all kinds of levels to it and whatnot. So, okay. My son has said, please. I guess he's talking about these oats. Let me get on this oats situation. Okay. I let him know. I said, okay, I'll get you your oats, boy. All right. Any other questions? Questions. Whoop. I went off my own side. Oh, other stuff. Stream of consciousness literature. I would know about the existentialists. I've been kind of obsessed with the existentialists the last couple of years because I feel like they don't, unless they're showing up on the multiple choice and students just aren't talking to me about them, they seem to me to be very interesting for an essay question. Like, what if they gave you like a piece of Dadaist art and then like a piece of like neoclassical art from Napoleonic era type stuff, or like the Oath of the Tennis Court or something by Davi. And they said, how do these two paintings reflect the times from which they come from? See, to me, that would be really interesting, because then you have to compare, like, okay, here during the French Revolution, it was all about, trying to look back to this classical nature. Napoleon was trying to fashion himself as a Roman emperor type, and he was also trying to rule in an enlightened fashion, or at least he said so, and blah, 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 blah. Whereas with this Dadaist art, it represents that everything's gone cattywampus, and we're trying to just make sense of a crazy world where nothing makes sense anymore. Or they could have a quote by, like, I don't know, Nietzsche, and say, like, how does this reflect, why did this gain popularity after World War I? You could talk about the lost generation, people who didn't come back. The idea that there was a whole generation of young artists and poets and writers that were killed in the trenches of World War I. And maybe that would be an interesting question. Sarah Parker. Who are you, Sarah Parker? Also, the women's liberation movement. I don't think that's a bad guess, but what the heck would they ask? I mean, I guess you could play that thing, but like, how did the roles of women change over the century? I mean, that's pretty broad. I can't think of a way to narrow it down. I would, if there was stuff on the multiple choice about that, sure. I'm okay with that. I don't think that's a bad guess. Existentialism versus Christian existentialism is actually pretty easy. Existentialism is basically like, hey, this is not my view, this is existentialist view. Existentialist says, we live in a world where there is no point to anything. There is no morals because there is no arbiter of morals. There is no God. Religion is meaningless. So anything you do is because you think it has meaning, and that is as valid as anyone else. Okay, that's existentialism. It's kind of, as you can see, kind of bleak. Some people look at it as being like, well, okay. I mean, it's a lot of freedom, but some people are like, ooh, too much freedom. Don't like that. And Kierkegaard says, okay, to a degree, that's true. We do have tons of freedom, but at the same time, we must understand we have a distant relationship with God. God does exist, and these other Christian existentialists say, because God exists, there is right and wrong, although the nature of that right and wrong, depending on which existentialist you're looking at, might be a little unclear, but we must go off of the results of God and try to discern his will, figure out what he wants us to do. Some Christian existentialists will even challenge aspects of the Bible in kind of an enlightenment-y kind of way and say, like, hey, maybe some miracles and stuff are exaggerated, but the basic stuff is there. Does that make sense? So the big difference between Christian existentialism and existentialism is Christians still believe in God, whereas the existentialists will be more like, probably there's nothing at all. There's no point to anything. You just do you. Just get up in there. Whatever gets you out of bed every day, that's good enough. Question. Deliver the oats. Okay, I'm gonna. Salvador Dali, surrealist. I like Salvador Dali, but let me hit you with a couple of other boys. And nope, did not mean to open my email. So boop, boop, boop. Rene Magritte is to me. I like him as much as Dali, if not more. He has all just kind of wacky stuff. It's, messing with perspective. It's just crazy. But all of this is dreamlike. I mean, you can see that. That's a Dali. Dali is super crazy. Sometimes he gets mixed in here. This is a Dali as well. I believe that's Dali as well, even though that says something about Magritte. That's a Dali as well. Sometimes people online get a little mixed up. Probably the most famous work by Salvador Dali is Persistence of Memory. This right here, in which it has like a human face, melting clocks, all of that. It's yeah, I really like Magritte as well. Agree with you, Eva. I like the way he covers faces too, maybe implying that there's no way we can ever truly know what someone is all about. I don't know. Maybe there's nothing to it at all, because it's dreamlike, and dreams don't always mean things. I was very into surrealist art when I was in high school and early college, like very into it. Like this painting was in, not this one, this one. This one was in my room. I thought I was hecka deep right there. I'd go to bed looking at this. I'd be like, "Whoa, man! Isn't that just a wave? What seems to be like a swan might actually be an elephant. Who knows, man? It all depends on your perspective." And I wasn't. I was like totally straight edge. But you got this. It's daytime, but is it really? The moon's always out. That sort of thing. There's a man there. Can anyone know anything? I know I can't, because you can't when you're like 15. Any other questions? Any other questions? I want to answer those. I want to answer questions. What? I'm actually kind of tired. TBH. My wife set her alarm this morning for like 5 o'clock in the morning, and then did the thing where she was like, gonna snooze for like an hour and 15 minutes. And it's the same. She uses her iPhone, and she uses the same thing that most people use for a ringtone. So it was like over and over again. I thought somebody was calling, and it was very upsetting. Question: Age of Anxiety, which I was kind of an emo boy. That's a good point, Georgie. The Age of Anxiety, we've already kind of talked about it. I just didn't call it that. It's essentially the idea that progress and the ideas of reason that Western society had been so fixated on since the Enlightenment had failed them. World War I hit. It showed there was nothing noble about battle. It was senseless, pointless fighting. 20 million people dead for what? That sort of thing. Well, it's Jimby. And so the Age of Anxiety, your major guys are going to be really anybody who is trying to address that. So you have your surrealist painters, your stream of consciousness people, the writers. You have guys like, Schoenberg? Composers, Stravinsky, there we go. Stravinsky, guys like that. So the Age of Anxiety does that. Also, a lot of people, as kind of alluded to earlier, they turn to these strong men. They turn away from liberalism, and they turn to these conservative leaders, Mussolini and Hitler, who are frankly trash, but they are, they promise like big solutions. They say, look, the decadence of society, what it's done. Society has gotten so bad, it's moved away from core principles. What we need to do is get back to basics. And guys like Hitler are like, women, having more rights and stuff? Nonsense. Get back and make some Aryan babies. And Mussolini, of course, very traditionalist as well. Now, the flip side of that is you've got Russia, which goes kind of the opposite way, which is like, you know what? The solution to what ails us is not more conservatism. It's super liberalism. And that's communism. And, of course, Stalin is a communist. Jimmy, you did miss a 30-minute discussion of France where we talked about top 10 French hits. We just call it that, hits, like the most important things. Number 6 really would have shocked you. Sorry, you missed it, though, and I'm not going to do it again. You'll have to go back and watch this afterwards. Any other questions? Like, are they going to ask you, like, how Hitler came to power? Possibly not. But what they might ask you to do is say, yo, what is the importance of the Night of the Long Knives? Or they might say, like, what kind of tactics did Hitler use to come to power? Something like that. Not sure. Oh yeah, we all ate baguettes online. We had a baguette fest. It was awesome. Any other questions? I got oats to deliver. I'm happy to help, but I got oats to deliver. What is the Night of the Long Knives? That's a good question. And 1934, Adolf Hitler eliminates members of his own party. Virtually every totalitarian dictator is going to purge or get rid of people within their own party they don't think are loyal enough. Stalin's are called the Great Purges. They take place over a period of time. Think of, for the Night of the Long Knives, think of, if you've ever seen The Godfather, towards the very, very end of the movie, minor spoilers for a movie that came out in the early 70s, Al Pacino has all of his enemies taken out in the same night. He just orders hits on everybody, all across the city, even across the country, all at once. That's basically what Hitler does. Hitler says, look, this guy I can't trust. This guy doesn't respect me enough. I think this guy might be a threat eventually. And so he eliminates all of these fellas all in one night. And it's called the Night of the Long Knives because he essentially guts the head of his own SA. That was his own private army, the brown shirts. He gets rid of the leadership of them, so like Ernst Röhm and guys like that, by using the SS, the Schutzstaffel, those guys who are kind of his Praetorian Guard, he describes them as, his own personal bodyguards, his elite. So you got those guys. So I think that answers that question. It's a purge. You always have purges. You should know what that word means. With Stalin's purges, Hitler says, you know what? I had a bunch of disorderly people, and we had to get rid of those people. And the people buy it. They're like, you know what? Hitler's doing a good job. He's restoring law and order to Germany. Thanks, Hitler. Good job. And he's like, I mean, thank you. When was what? Well, Night of the Long Knives, 1934, you goose, in Germany. French people be like, number 6. Oh, I don't get that. If it's inappropriate, I apologize for reading it. If it's not inappropriate, I don't get it. I don't understand it. With Stalin over in the Soviet Union, he actually stages an assassination on the police chief of Leningrad, I think, a guy named Sergei Kirov. And then he's like, somebody went after our guy. We need to crack down. And so he starts trying to take out anybody that he feels isn't loyal enough. But unlike Hitler, who did everything in one night, Stalin did it over a series of years. In both things, you see fake confessions by, not by Hitler, because he had people murdered right then. But when you were arrested for being an enemy of the state, he tended to have you confess to things you didn't do or confess that you were part of a larger thing. Stalin was very big on this. Stalin was even so crazy that sometimes if he orders you to be assassinated, he would order the assassins to be assassinated if they knew too much. Obviously, the preferential thing was to not have them know too much. Oh, maybe the number 6 is like, oh, I don't know. I just don't know. Confused. So here's the people I have for coming to this review. I have Emma, Eva, Isabel, Georgie, Cyan, Nicole, Lindsay, Kate, first grade Kate, and Georgie. I feel like I said Georgie twice. I did. I said Georgie twice. Did I miss anybody? Speak now. Also, if you're Emma or Isabel or Cyan, yell to tell me you're still there. I don't think you left early. Waiting for questions. Jimby. Oh, I suppose Jimby. Jimby. I'm going to write down Jimby Hearts, France. You know we're taking a trip to France in 2020, Jimby. I made a sad little heart that says Jimby Hearts, France. And that Hearts, France is inside a heart, so you super love it. The number 6 fact that would have been shot. Oh, right. Oh, I feel like I learn more now than I do in general. I don't know how to respond to that. I'm glad you're learning more. I don't know if that's my fault or if you're just smarter now. I often say that my students are smarter at the end of the year just because there's such a barrage of information. So yeah, that's a thing. Like real talk, go back and look at your flashcards and use them. You have a whole deck of the best, well, assuming you did a decent job, the best like study materials you could possibly ask for. So that's real good. God, I'm tired. It's like 4:17, but because of that alarm, look at that. Because of that alarm. Hi, Isabel. Okay, you're still here. Okay, so any other questions? I'll give like 30 seconds for that. Lindsay asked to see the baby. She wanted to take down the baby. Jesse does want to see you. Don't worry. Here, maybe I'll go off screen. And the baby can answer questions.
Hello. What questions do you hold for me? Okay, whoops.
I accidentally
deleted Jimby's comment. I did not mean to do that. Sorry, Jimby, can I undo that? I unhide. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. Okay, other questions? Hello, Lindsay. Hello. I'll see you tonight in your dreams.
Okay, that's enough of that. That's not cool. Jesse's a little, he's like it is like a party every day.
Hey, Jesse.
All right, so I'm gonna dip. If you got any more questions, I want to do another review on the 7th. That's the night before Euro, the Euro test, and I have mixed feelings because the Euro test, real talk, if you don't know the stuff by the 7th, you're not gonna know it. I mean, that's all there is to it. So, oh, that's weird.
I like France.
Wow. Okay, weird. Anyway, I want to do a review, but I don't want to like do a review because it's like if you don't know it by that point, you're doomed. No offense. So cramming at the last minute is a terrible idea for something with this much information. The best course of action was to study it as you went along. You still have time to cram if you must, but you need to put it into your long-term information bank. So you're going to need to sit down and talk to other people about it. But I'll do at least an hour on the 7th. I'll try to do it like I think I said 7 o'clock. I'll try to stick for that nighttime one, but I don't want people to stay up late, and I want you to get plenty of rest. Okay? Do we agree to that? We don't want anybody to get tired.